Hello, and welcome to the next section in this. This is the sixth one in the Building Better Teams series, and we're looking at building a shared vision. How you do that through consensus and defining expectations. We are in the third session of this is an adaptation of one we hosted in person. But there are opportunities for you to kind of reflect where we did have lots of discussions, but we are looking at the building consensus around a clear vision and defining expectations. This gives you some idea of what other pieces you can check out on the website, and I encourage you to do so. So, how would you like a more junior member to show up? And by this, I don't mean seniority or hierarchy. I just mean someone who hasn't been part of the team for as long as you has. This might be a faculty member, this might be someone more senior than you, but someone who is a new recruit to the team. Take a second, pause the video, write down some of the ways that you would like a new teammate to show up and engage in team science. We will return to that shortly, but part of how that turns up is developing a clear and shared vision. What do I mean by that? Well, most researchers have more choices of how to spend their time than they can accommodate. The figure I thought of here is someone who's coming to a buffet and just fills their plate. Everything looks fantastic, everything looks super tasty, and they just grab everything from across the board. And they are going to end up full. They're not going to end up tasting everything. It's going to end up just being a bit of a mess. If you have a clear vision, if just that one thing looks more tasty than anything else, that's going to attract people to it. That's going to attract your team members. It's going to motivate people. If the project is not clear, if it's not accessible, and it doesn't feel motivating, folks won't get excited by it. They might still do it because, well, they've been paid to do it, but you're not going to get that person's best effort because it's forced. It's not because they're not doing it because they're excited, they're doing it because. So, you know, really, how do you get a motivated team? You need to work together and come up with a why should we do this? And it should be one that's brought together in a shared fashion and really engages everybody on the team. Because there might be people who go through that process and say, actually, this isn't for me. And that's fine. You can rotate around on the team, but it means that you've got engagement from everybody. You're not just filling up their plate with one more thing. I would argue that without a shared vision, the team is not really working on the same project. So, no vision, everyone's pointing off in different directions and thinking about different things. An imposed vision means that you've been told what to do. You might not agree with it, and you might be thinking about other things, and you might be considering other ideas, but you're kind of going in a direction that you maybe don't agree with. A shared vision is where you really build momentum. It's where you really work together, you develop new ideas together, you kind of merge and really get this interdisciplinary space working together. You might not realize that you don't have a shared vision. Think about teams that you're on at the moment. Which one of these are you in? How do you tell the difference between no vision and an imposed vision, or an imposed vision and a shared vision? I think individuals on the basis when you stop and think about it, you can realize which of these you're in. And maybe you need to take a step and really, how do you get yourself to be in a space where you have a shared vision? One way to do this is really think about how you create a North Star. Have you asked questions of each other? Have you actually sat down and asked people what they think they're working towards? Have you given folks a chance to talk about it and maybe explore new ideas? Have you identified and really given voice to spaces where the team disagrees or where there is misunderstanding or confusion? If you haven't talked through that, there's likely a lot of spaces that need more attention than you think. So I want you to pause and write down, maybe pause the video for 30 seconds. Think about what is the difference between a shared vision and an imposed vision? How can you tell? What are the benefits? What are the pros and cons? So take 30 seconds, write some stuff down. We'll be touching on some of these aspects as we move along. The idea here is that you need to have a plan. I'm going to go back to my mountain analogy again. You need to have a plan, but you need to share that plan and you need to get input from people on what those milestones and what that plan looks like. So I might have a plan and I'm like, yeah, clearly we're going to go this way to get to the top. If I don't communicate that, my climbers might head off early in the morning before I get up and start putting up pitches in a different direction. They're still going to the same goal, but they're taking a different route and they've got a different plan. And so, because I didn't effectively communicate, we're going in a different direction. And this chap is headed to a completely different mountain because they were not paying attention in a Zoom call. So, be deliberate and think about what are your plans and what are the things that you're looking at. Try some exercises. Literally take 30 minutes in the next meeting that you have and take time to do this. I know that's a tough call because people are like, I am busy and I just want to get going on these. But asking these questions is useful, and we've got some tools that you can use and some recommendations on how to do this. Maybe start with this one at the bottom. Create a one-liner. Almost send this out. It doesn't need to be done during the meeting, but ask each team member to create on their own a simple one-sentence summary that unites the team, and then compare these. What that will do is tell you what each teammate thinks is the most important thing. And you'll be surprised that, maybe it'll all be the same. But I would bet money that there will be difference, even on the most unified teams. The way to make this explicit and the structure that you can use to help really define this vision is to put this down on paper. And I know in a lot of instances it's going to be hard because people are busy and they're like, I don't want to spend time on this. But it will really help because it makes it explicit. Having to write this down means that people have to give it thought that they maybe haven't been thinking about. So, really think about what are the important aspects. Writing it down means you have an opportunity to discuss the differences. So, why did you say this is more important than this? Well, it's because I'm coming from a different discipline and this is a really important thing. You might not have realized that that finding is important, but by writing it down and talking about it, you can learn more from your teammates. And then define what your expectations are. Are we going to get a certain number of papers out of this? Are we going to write this piece up? Are we going to work towards this? There might be things that you didn't realize people wanted to work towards. There might be work that you had no idea was on the horizon. And this last one, disagreement is great, and we have a whole section on this, but disagreement is where you learn. So these are many of the things that are looked at in a collaborative research agreement, and we spent some time on the in-person thing, really kind of talking through these. We have this for IMOD. We have a collaboration agreement that people can use as a structure to guide this conversation. There's some really fantastic resources available online towards collaboration agreements. There are sort of recommended questions. I would absolutely go and look for one of these. Even if you just address one third of the questions that's on here, it helps your team structure how you're working together. And we'll revisit this in some of the future sessions as well. But I would encourage you to think about what it looks like to have a collaborative agreement for your teams. This is maybe some of the things that we run through, and you are absolutely welcome to kind of take these questions, but you could send this out a week in advance to your whole team and get individuals to fill this out separately and then use this as a comparison tool to say, okay, are we agreeing on success? What does success look like for the project? Is that different to what the team success looks like? The team might outlast this individual project. Folks might be thinking about that. Some might not be. What are the deliverables? Are these going to be different? How will things like important decisions be made? How are we going to hold each other accountable? You don't want to be asking that question when you need to hold somebody accountable. You want to talk about it up front and really set some ground rules for how we're going to operate. How are we going to onboard new people? Do we have like a repository of information that we can just send to them, or do we need to bring them up to speed in other ways? Team dynamics. How are we going to build trust? We have a whole section on that. How are we going to manage our differences? Do we agree all at the start out that we are going to focus on disagreeing about ideas, but our teammates are our teammates, and we're not going to make it a personal thing. If things do go wrong, how are we going to fix it? What are we going to do? Again, talking about these things up front will help people understand that. Defining how we're going to communicate. Does everyone use Slack? Does everyone respond to emails? Are there things that we're going to have to change and be flexible about to make sure that everybody in the team is being kept in the loop? How do we build a shared vocabulary? Do we just assume that people are writing that down, or do we set up a centralized single source of truth so that we can really use that as a tool? That's part of the defining expectations. You can assign roles, you can assign leaders, people who are going to lead which meetings we're going to have, people who are going to lead how we store our data, people who are going to lead on accountability. Setting up those roles is actually a super valuable tool because then people know what they're doing. Everybody wants to know what they're doing in a team. So assigning those roles, and it's not a permanent thing. You can just say, for the first 6 months, John over here is going to be in charge of team meetings, and he might pass that on to somebody else. What it helps with is that you don't get misaligned efforts. What does that mean? Well, if you don't have a clear vision or understanding of who is doing what, then you are likely to end up in a space where there is duplicative effort. And that is one of the most common causes of disagreement and conflict. And that one tends to be pretty personal. It also prevents you not meeting expectations. Part of this is maybe defining that if you can't meet a deadline, you give notice. You don't tell people the morning of that you're not going to be able to send something because they might have cleared their schedules to work on it. You give them a week's notice and they might be in a position to help you. They might say, okay, great, we can bring more people onto this, or that's not a problem. A week later is fine. I can manage that. But talking to people and defining those expectations is a great way to set up your team for success. I've talked to these a little bit, but maybe take 30 seconds. There are lots of roles and responsibilities in a team environment, and the discussion around this was super interesting in person. There were things that were uncovered that I wasn't really thinking about. Part of this is that it's going to be a constant effort. You will have meetings and you will have people who have other demands on their time on that day. There might be a deadline that's 5 p.m. that day, and they're like, I'm going to turn up to the meeting, but it's going to be in the background. You might have people who have sidebars. You might have people who get lost because you're not doing a great job of explaining yourself. And you could have a team that walks away from a meeting with very different understandings of the situation. If you have a lack of clarity, and a lack of understanding, that is a surefire way to generate disagreement and conflict in a team. And that's where defining who is doing what, have time at the end of your meeting where you say, okay, great, let's review who is doing what. Even if you have a recording of the meeting like this, I might still take away different things from the meeting than you did because we're all coming to things differently. And so really being explicit in a team environment is essential to helping defining who is doing what roles are being fulfilled, and what ones are maybe falling through the cracks. No one gets hints, especially at work. Everyone has a slightly different sense of humor and a slightly different sense of how they're looking at things. And so think about that. Everyone in the meeting assumes that everybody else knows what they're saying unless they are asked. So if you don't understand or you're not sure, it is on you to ask that question. If you're someone who has been asked, respond with gratitude. This is an opportunity for learning. You're clearly not doing a good enough job communicating, and this is a space that you can improve. If someone's asking a question, then take it as an opportunity to really say, okay, let me help you. You're helping me by showing that I maybe needed to work on this a little bit harder, but I can bring you along and make sure we're on the same page. Poor communication creates more work, period. We have a whole section on communication and we will revisit these things. You can avoid a lot of problems by making sure that everyone is on the same page. If you go through an entire meeting or through an entire presentation and no one's asking you questions, there's a pretty strong assumption that you've lost them. You're not communicating well enough. And maybe start to kind of say, are folks understanding me? Do you know what I mean by this? Because you're trying to bring people along with you and help them understand what you're talking about. And there are situations where it's nothing to do with technical. We're just ambiguous about this. Who in this environment, in this scenario, is doing the task? It's left up to interpretation. It's not clear, and there's lack of clarity. Same thing here. You could, if you don't ask for clarity, you could go off and you could do a decent amount of work and come back and then be like, oh, that's not what I meant. That is a two-way thing. You need to make sure that you have questioned it, that you have made sure you are clear on what you're doing. And as a teammate, both giving and receiving information in a way that is um, clarified. So here's the action items. You can take these away. We've covered um, most of these pieces. Next up is building trust. A lot of this is based on developing a clear vision, which is why we went through this. But yeah, building trust in a team environment. Hope to see you there.